Al Capone, the most feared gangster in American history, may have invented something sitting in your refrigerator right now. Look at the side of this bottle, that little stamped date, the one you glance at every single morning without a second thought, has a story behind it. And it's not the story you'd expect. It doesn't begin in a laboratory. It doesn't begin with a food scientist or a government health board or some well-meaning crusader for public safety. According to legend, it begins with a gun. It begins in Chicago in the dying days of Prohibition, a city carved up by one of the most feared criminal empires in American history. At the center of that empire sat a man whose name still echoes a century later, a man synonymous with bootlegging, with bloodshed, with the violent machinery of organized crime. Al Capone. Here's where the story gets strange. The same name that built a fortune on illegal liquor and ruled the streets through fear is the same name that legend ties to the humble expiration date on your morning milk. How does a ruthless mafia boss end up supposedly as the unlikely architect of food safety? Why would the most notorious gangster in America care whether your milk had gone sour? The truth is tangled. Parts of it are documented and parts of it are almost certainly myth. Separating the two takes us into a world of soured fortunes, family illness, and a criminal empire searching for one last legitimate racket. This is the legend of the gangster who dated your milk. To understand how milk enters this story, you have to understand what was happening to Al Capone's world in the early 1930s. For nearly a decade, Prohibition had been the greatest gift organized crime ever received. When the United States ratified the 18th Amendment, making alcohol illegal in 1920, it didn't stop people from drinking. It simply handed the entire liquor trade to whoever was ruthless enough to control it. In Chicago, that was the Capone organization, built on the foundation laid by his predecessor, Johnny Torrio. The outfit history would remember as the Chicago Outfit. The money was staggering. By some accounts, Capone's operation pulled in around $100 million a year, almost all of it from smuggling and selling illegal alcohol. He controlled breweries, he controlled distribution, and crucially, remember this part, he controlled the bottling facilities that packaged all of it. But empires built on a single law live and die by that law. By the early 1930s, the writing was on the wall. The public was tired of prohibition. The country was sliding deep into the Great Depression, and the political momentum to repeal the alcohol ban was growing by the day. When the 21st Amendment finally ended prohibition in 1933, the most profitable racket in American history would simply evaporate overnight. Capone, the legend goes, saw it coming. A businessman as much as a gangster, he started asking a dangerous question. When the liquor money dries up, what comes next? He needed a new product, something legal this time, something with steady demand, something people would buy not once a week, but every single day. As the story is often told, he found his answer in the most ordinary place imaginable, the refrigerator, or rather, what passed for one in 1932. There was one product nearly every household in America bought, day after day, without fail. A product with margins that, as one version of the tale claims, actually beat alcohol. A product sitting in an industry with almost no regulation, ripe for a man who knew how to seize control of things. Milk. Here's the part of the story that isn't legend. This part is real. In 1932, the Capone organization quietly moved into the dairy business. On May 4th of that year, members of the outfit purchased a company called Meadowmoor Dairies on Chicago's South Peoria Street. The man most directly involved in brokering that acquisition was Murray Humphreys, known on the street as the Hump, Capone's political fixer and one of the outfit's most sophisticated operators. Just like that, some of the most feared men in America became, of all things, milkmen. At the center of it was a name you might not know as well as Al's, his older brother, Ralph Capone. Ralph was no minor figure. Chicago law enforcement once branded him public enemy number 3. But within the family business, Ralph earned a very different kind of reputation, and a nickname that stuck for the rest of his life. They called him Ralph Bottles Capone. Most people assume a mobster named Bottles got that name from bootlegging liquor. It would make sense. But according to the story handed down through Chicago history, that's not where it came from at all. Ralph got the name Bottles from the milk business, from bottling dairy and pushing the industry to date its product. The logic behind the move was coldly brilliant. As one telling puts it, the family looked at the numbers and realized the markup on fresh milk was actually higher than the markup on alcohol. Milk was something families bought every single day. The kids out in the neighborhoods needed gallons of it, and the wealthy households on Lakeshore Drive wanted thick cream for their coffee. The demand never stopped. Best of all, the Capones already owned the infrastructure. The same bottling and distribution machinery they'd used to move illegal alcohol could be repurposed almost overnight to move milk. And controlling the supply chain meant controlling the workers who moved it. The Milk Wagon Drivers Union Local 753 became a critical piece of the puzzle, with union leader Steve Sumner among those caught up in the outfit's pressure campaign to dominate the Chicago dairy market. So the pieces were in place. A powerful criminal organization, a legitimate product with endless demand, and a family looking to control an industry that, at the time, had almost no rules governing how fresh or how dangerous that product really was. That lack of rules is the hinge this entire story turns on. The next move the Capones allegedly made wouldn't just build their business. It would, according to legend, change the way every one of us eats, right up to today. Every great legend needs a turning point, a single moment where everything changes. In this story, that moment arrives as the tale is told with a sick child and a bottle of spoiled milk. The story goes something like this. Someone close to the Capone family, in some versions a relative, in others, the child of a friend. In a few tellings, Al's own sister drank milk that had gone bad, and they became violently ill. Picture that scene through the eyes of a man like Capone, a man who ruled through force, who solved problems by sheer will, watching someone he cared about laid low by something as small and as preventable as sour milk. There was no way for an ordinary family to know, no label, no warning, no date, whether the bottle in their icebox was fresh or quietly turning poisonous. That was the reality of the 1930s. This was a world before widespread refrigeration, before supermarkets, before pasteurization was universal. Milk was delivered, stored in iceboxes, and consumed largely on trust. There was no reliable way for a mother to look at a bottle and know how long it had been sitting there. Spoiled milk wasn't just unpleasant. In an era of weaker food safety, it could genuinely make people sick. So the legend says the gangster did something gangsters don't usually do. He decided to fix it. According to the story, Capone used his influence to push for a law, a regulation forcing dairies to stamp a clear, readable date directly onto every milk bottle. A date any customer could understand at a glance. The documented version of this tale points to Chicago in 1933 and a city ordinance built around a simple rule that Grade A milk couldn't be sold as fresh more than 72 hours after it left the cow. 3 days stamped on the glass, plain enough for anyone to read. It's a genuinely touching image, the ruthless mob boss as a secret guardian of public health. A latter-day Robin Hood, the kind of figure Capone genuinely cultivated in Depression-era Chicago, where he famously opened soup kitchens, feeding the hungry by the thousands. But here's the question every good story has to face eventually. Is any of it actually true? So let's do the thing the legend rarely does. Let's actually pull it apart. As satisfying as the story is, historians and fact-checkers have a much less romantic answer to the question of whether Al Capone invented the expiration date. That answer is, essentially, not really. At least not the way the legend claims. Start with the biggest problem. There's no solid evidence that Al Capone himself was writing letters to the city council, lobbying lawmakers, or personally crusading for food safety. The popular version, Scarface moved by a sick relative, single-handedly forcing milk dating into law, doesn't hold up under scrutiny. By the time some of these regulations were taking shape, Capone was already on his way to federal prison for tax evasion. He wasn't exactly in a position to be reshaping Chicago's dairy code from a cell. Then there's the question of where this story even came from. Fact-checkers at Snopes trace the popular telling back to a single main source, a 2010 book written by Capone's own grandniece, Deirdre Marie Capone, titled Uncle Al Capone, The Untold Story from Inside His Family, recounting family stories from inside the household. It's a fascinating source, but it's a family memoir, written decades later, not a documented public record. Even she doesn't fully confirm the most dramatic version of events. The truth that survives all this scrutiny is much smaller and much messier. Yes, the Capone family really was in the dairy business. Yes, Ralph Bottles Capone really did earn that name in milk, not liquor. And yes, the family's involvement coincided with a real push for milk dating in Chicago in the early 1930s. But a crime family having financial interests in dairy during a period when milk dating was being introduced is a very different claim than a mafia boss inventing the expiration date out of the goodness of his heart. Here's the detail that quietly undermines the whole heartwarming version. Even the experts who push back on the legend point out the same uncomfortable irony, that the financial motive fits far better than the noble one. The Capones already owned the bottling and marking equipment from their Prohibition operation. If milk dating became mandatory, they were perfectly positioned to profit from it, and to use those same regulations to squeeze out competitors who couldn't keep up. In one telling, that's exactly what happened afterward, as rivals were driven out of the Chicago dairy market. So the gangster with a heart of gold? He might really have just been a gangster. So where does that leave us, standing here nearly a century later, staring at that little stamp on the bottle, with one final, strange twist? Here's what almost nobody realizes about the expiration date, whether or not a gangster had anything to do with it. That date isn't really about safety at all. We treat those stamps like a hard line between safe and dangerous. Good milk on one side, poison on the other. But for most foods, the date you see is about quality, not safety. A manufacturer's best guess at peak freshness, not a medical warning that the food has become hazardous. There's no single, unified federal system dictating what most of those labels even mean. Sell by, best by, use by. They sound official, but they're a patchwork and they're frequently misunderstood. And here's the kicker. To this day, there's no federal law requiring expiration dates on most food at all, except infant formula. The Food Date Labelling Act, which would finally standardize what those dates actually mean, is still being debated in Congress. The cost of that confusion is enormous. Studies have found that nearly 10% of all wasted food in the United States is discarded due to confusion over date labels. Billions of dollars of edible food thrown out over a misread stamp. Meanwhile, in other countries, health officials worry about the opposite problem: people ignoring genuine safety dates and getting sick. The very system meant to bring clarity to the icebox still leaves us guessing. That's the real irony sitting at the bottom of this whole story. Whether the legend is true or not, it points at something genuinely true. The way we date our food was never the clean, scientific, carefully planned system we imagine. It grew up messy, shaped by business interests, by patchy local rules, by accidents of history. And maybe, just maybe, with a criminal empire's fingerprints somewhere on the glass. So the next time you pull a carton from the fridge and check that little stamped date before you pour, remember that you may be looking at the strange echo of a Chicago legend. A story where the most feared gangster in America, his bottle-naming brother, and a single sour glass of milk collided with the everyday object in your hand. Is it the literal truth? Almost certainly not, at least not the heroic version. Is it a legend worth knowing? Absolutely, because some stories like good milk are better when you don't let them spoil.